One day last summer, I was driving in my car from Texas to Arizona to visit my sister. I was taking a scenic back route because I enjoy the open roads. I also enjoyed it because there was basically no traffic and no cops, so if I wanted to go a little bit above the speed limit, I could. It was okay. This road was one of those seemingly deserted roads with one lane and nothing but desert on each side. As I was cruising along, all of a sudden the car began to make a popping noise from under the hood like it was cutting in and out. I thought to myself, great, this is exactly what I don't need out here in the middle of nowhere. I brought the car to a stop and pulled over off the side of the road. I got out and opened the hood and looked at the engine as if I knew what I was doing or what to look at. There was no smoke or anything that looked out of place, but just the same, I had no idea what the problem was. I got back into the car and tried to start it, and as I had feared, it still didn't start. It was an older car, but had always been reliable, otherwise I wouldn't take it on long trips. Naturally, I tried to call my roadside assistance company, but that only made things worse when I realized I didn't have enough cell service way out here. I was so far out in the desert that I hadn't even seen a single other car pass me in the last hour I'd been driving. I was terrified to think about how long it would be before someone came along. As I sat on the side of the road, I started to get really scared because now it was starting to get dark out. Eventually, it was completely dark and I was getting hungry as well. Luckily, I'd always kept extra water in the trunk, so at least I had something to drink. As I sat there, 3 hours had gone by and no cars had passed, and then eventually I saw headlights approaching. I had my car's hazard lights on, but I also waved my arms back and forth to make sure to get their attention. As I got closer, I saw that it was a man in a truck. He pulled over to the side of the road, and as he stepped out, I could see that he was a fairly huge man. I told him my car had broken down and asked if he knew anything about cars. He wasn't immediately interested in my car and instead seemed more interested in asking me if I was alone, where I was going, and why I hadn't just called for help. He also asked me if anyone else knew I was out here. These questions were really creeping me out. If he was trying to make me uncomfortable, he certainly succeeded. He eventually told me that he didn't know much about engines but did offer to give me a ride. At this point, I was trying to think of what was the better of the two choices, taking his offer for a ride or sitting out here all night in the dark. I was certainly in a bad situation. After thinking about it for a minute, I didn't want to come off as ungrateful, so I climbed into his truck and we began driving. He started asking me more questions, such as why I would decide to take a back out of the way road like this. After a few minutes, the truck started to slow down and I heard him say, "Damn it," and he pulled over to the side of the road, looked at me and said, "The piece of crap just broke down." I thought to myself, this can't be happening. When I looked back over at the man, I realized he was staring at me. After 4 or 5 seconds passed and he was still staring at me, he finally asked me to go lift the hood while he pulled the latch. Now, up until this point, I had been extremely suspicious and was at my wit's end. I got out of the truck and walked to the front to lift the hood, as he had asked, and waited for a click to indicate that the truck's hood had been unlatched. As I did this, I had pictured in my mind everything that could go wrong here, and for some reason imagined him trying to run me over. Then, that's what happened, and at the exact moment the truck started and I heard the engine roar as he stepped on the gas. If I had reacted a half a second later, I would have lost my legs or been killed instantly. I took off running into the pitch black night, looking back to see the headlights coming towards me. He came close a few times, but luckily because it was so dark and there were a lot of bushes out here, I was able to hide and lose him as I stayed down, low to the ground. This guy was clearly trying to kill me. Once his lights were off of me, I ran as far as I could before getting down as low as possible to the ground so he couldn't see me. Eventually, when he couldn't find me, he got tired of looking. I heard his truck speeding away in the distance. I watched his taillights slowly disappear down the road. I eventually fell asleep on the side of the road, and early the next morning I awoke to another pickup truck passing by, coming from the opposite direction. Covered in dirt and sand, I was able to wave them down, and thank God this man and his wife are normal. They gave me water and drove me to the nearest town where I was finally able to call the towing company. To make a long story short, this was the worst experience I've ever had in my life. I've never been more scared, and I'm sure I won't forget it anytime soon. My name is John and I'm from California. 2 summers ago, I was on a cross-country road trip with my girlfriend Joanne. We were going to visit some friends at a big reunion. We chose to drive instead of flying because we could make several stops along the way in cities that we liked, plus we had some extra time. The first day we drove a good 7 or 8 hours and then stopped for the night at a nearby hotel. On the second day, we wanted to make it a little bit further, so we drove a little later into the night. We got off of the main highway at about 12:30 a.m. and got onto another smaller road to cross over onto another route. This road had woods on both sides of it and was pretty quiet with not much traffic at this time of night. There were only a couple of other cars here and there every so often. After driving for about 20 minutes, it started raining heavily, and then from out of nowhere we saw what appeared to be a woman standing in the middle of the road waving her arms trying to flag us down. I hit my brakes to slow down and stopped in front of her. We could see that she was an older looking woman with a hood on who appeared to be in her late 70s. She was already drenched and looking disheveled and tired and looked like she was in trouble. The old woman came up to my driver's door window and I rolled it down just a crack. She seemed genuinely concerned. I asked her what was wrong and she said that her car ran out of gas a little way back off a side road and she was walking to try to get back to her house, but the rain was making it more difficult for her. She asked if we could drive her to her house and she said it was just a couple of miles up the road. My instant reaction, of course, was to say no, and I really wish that I did, but the old woman seemed harmless enough, so I figured why not help her out. I told her to get into the back and I would give her a ride. My girlfriend gave me a look which was a what in the hell did you let her in for kind of look. She got into the back seat and thanked us several times. She told us again that her house was just up the road and gave me directions. She said that she had some gas that she could get and take back to her car in her other truck. We proceeded to drive up the road about a mile, then took a turn onto a very dark, quiet road surrounded by dense woods on both sides. We continued down this road for a minute or so when the woman told us to turn at what appeared to be a driveway. I pulled into it and asked the woman if this was her driveway. She said yes, but then asked if we could drive her further up. I said yes, and again my girlfriend gave me another look, but I ignored her. It was a thin driveway that winded up and around, and I couldn't see very far in front because of all the trees and darkness. I kept driving, but started to get a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. Eventually, the driveway turned into a clearing. The woman said that this was fine and we could drop her off here. At this point, she said thank you so much and then got out of the car. The second she got out, I saw a movement coming from the woods behind my car. Then I turned and saw more movement in the front of my car. Right then I realized it was about 6 men with masks on and bats. I didn't hesitate and threw the car into reverse and stomped on the gas. I backed most of the way out as they were running after us and throwing things at the front window of the car and trying to open the doors. The whole time my girlfriend was screaming. At one point when we were far enough away, I got the car turned around. One of the men hit the side of the car with something, but I don't even know what it was. We finally got out of the driveway and back onto the road and then sped off back to the highway. My girlfriend was shaking, and I have to admit that I was too. I don't know what kind of trap that old woman was trying to lure us into, but it isn't something I would have ever expected to happen to us. Nevertheless, I'm glad we made it out alive, but I know I'm never stopping to pick anyone up ever again. My name is Vanessa and I live with my mom in Central California. At the age of 18, I got my first job in the summer of 2021. I was looking forward to going to work, but not so much to the commute because it was a 45-minute drive each way, and I usually got home around 12:15 in the morning. The last thing I wanted to do was drive home for 45 minutes after getting out of work that late. This was only my second week there, and I was still getting used to my new schedule. One night after I got out of work, I was driving home and realized I didn't have enough gas to get to my exit. I knew of an out-of-the-way gas station that was right off the side of the road, but I usually didn't stop there because it was kind of creepy. In this case, I didn't really have a choice, and plus it was open 24/7. I figured because I didn't have a choice, I would just stop, get my gas, and leave as quickly as possible. Once I got there, I pulled up to the pump, got out and swiped my card and began pumping gas. I had decided to only put $10 in, which was plenty to get me home. Once the pump reached 10, I turned it off and printed my receipt. Thinking I was just about done and ready to get in my car and drive away, a voice came over the small intercom above the gas pump and said, miss, there's an issue with your credit card payment. Would you mind coming in, please?" I paused and looked at the man through the window behind the counter, and a chill ran down my spine. He was one of those tall, lanky, sketchy-looking guys that gave me the creeps. He was staring out the window at me, beckoning me to go inside. I took a step back towards the gas pump and pressed the intercom button and asked what the issue is. I told him I have a receipt proving that everything went through with no problem. I by no means was trying to hide my annoyance with my tone of voice. Again, he said, "I just need you to come inside, please, ma'am. The receipt you have is incorrect. I'll need to rerun your credit card through again in here." In frustration, I returned my stare back across the parking lot through the window to the man. I had no intention of going in there as we were the only two around and I didn't want to be in there alone with them. Now he was staring at me with wide open eyes and a creepy look on his face. I stood firm, took out my phone, and opened my credit card app. I stupidly held it up as if he could see it from there and pressed the intercom button again. I told him that it was clearly accepted and I see it in my balance. I'm not going to come in. Again, his voice came over the speaker and he said, "If you leave, I'm going to call the police. I've got your license plate number. Please come inside." Now I was really annoyed, and instead of using the intercom, I yelled at him from across the parking lot and said, "Really? You're going to call the police over $10? I'm leaving." I took a few steps towards my car and gave him the thumbs up. I was about to walk back around my car towards the driver's door to get in and then paused because I noticed that he was mouthing something to me through the glass. I would have ignored it, but he suddenly appeared desperate rather than creepy. He kept waving for me to come forward and saying something that I couldn't understand through the window. I must have made a strange expression because 5 seconds later he held up a piece of paper against the glass that was hastily written and in big words that said, "There's a man in your back seat with a knife." I looked down into the back and I saw him. I turned and ran into the gas station, and the clerk locked the door and told me to get down. As he was watching my car, a tall man in sweatpants and a windbreaker opened the back door of my car and quickly got out and ran away into the dark. As I was staying down behind the counter, I could see him on the security cameras. As I started freaking out, the clerk told me that he had noticed the guy on the monitors. He said that the guy was hanging around the side of the building, and right after I pulled up, as I was swiping my card, he kneeled, opened the back door, and quietly slipped into the back seat. He was careful not to close the door loudly so I couldn't hear anything. All of this was caught on camera by the clerk, who immediately called the police, who arrived a few minutes later. They searched the area in my car but didn't find the man or anything that would lead back to him. Who knows what would have happened if I had driven away with that stranger in my back seat. All I know is that I owe my life to that observant gas station clerk.